I'm not used to this new age stuff. I'm still old school, but nonetheless, I am Dr. Reginald Cunningham. I'm a licensed professional counselor in both Maryland, DC, also New Jersey and Minnesota. And I have a group practice in Washington, DC itself. So glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Dr. I'm not sure, I'm just not, Troy Mason. I was about to say Mason. So you used to call you Mason.
I've been called pastors and doctors all day. I take all of it. I represent the Richmond, Virginia area. I'm honored to be a part of a panel of all these distinguished men and women. Hopefully what I have to say to the panel and to those who are listening can be very influential, inspiring, and result-oriented. Glad to be here.
Okay, Gerald. You're muted there.
Oh man, I ain't nobody. My name is Dr. Gerald Penny. I'm from the greatest place on earth, Houston, Texas, 3rd Ward to be specific. Listen, if you ain't with it, it's cool. I ain't gonna fight you. You're just wrong. I'm currently an assistant professor of clinical mental health counseling at Texas A&M Central Texas in Killeen, Texas. No, it's not Fort Hood. That's a different place. I have my own practice where I specialize in working with adolescents to adulthood, specifically Black adolescents and towards adulthood, and even more specifically, Black men. It's not that I don't see Black women, it's just that Black men tend to come to me a lot more. And I do a whole bunch of other stuff too. I'm like a chief strategy officer or some stuff. It's a lot. I got a lot going on. A lot of things happening.
Okay. And I'm not sure if, well, there he is. Pastor Owens.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pastor Darrell Owens, and I pastor the Journey Worldwide Spiritual Center here in Washington, D.C. And I'm an advocate for the empowerment, the uplifting of all people in Christ consciousness, freedom, and love. So glad to be here.
All right. Thank you, panelists, for introducing yourself. So we came here to learn more about, as we were saying before, the journey of the little Black boy into the big Black man. And one of the words that we know that so many people associate with African-American or Black men is tough. And today we really want to sit here and have a conversation around that word. I've heard it on so many different platforms as being normalized as abuse, but we all know that that is not really what toxic masculinity is. So the first thing, my first question is, what is toxic masculinity?
I think
I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
Toxic masculinity is misformed information, unused, unwanted tools that were passed down with no positive results. I'm over 40, so I represent that era of punch you in your chest, man up era. I grew up in an era where I was told that young boys are seen and not heard. Their voices are silent very early. That's very toxic. I grew up in an era where my peers would be being judged on how many girls we had sex with and how many notches we had on our belt, AKA very toxic. These things I was taught as a young man to get praised for potential negative things. That's my definition of being toxic, because the results are not very rewarding. It's something I'll be proud of. So the toxic is things that I've been taught and seen, the results didn't follow.
Okay. Pastor Owens, I know you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, when you talk about being toxic, it's such a spectrum. It's many ways that you can, you can wind up in that category. And I would say that anything that really makes you, the word I would use better is unhealthy, right? Anything that makes you unhealthy or you become unhealthy to those with whom you have to do, that kind of makes you that's what really puts you in that category of being toxic. And whenever you are self-destructive, I think that's the easiest guide for me when I talk to people is that, if you find yourself being self-destructive, this is when you find yourself in toxicity, and that will just, of course, map on into overflow into other areas of your life. So.
Anyone else want to jump in there?
I will. For so long, you know, we as Black men have been labeled with these negative terms based on our behaviors. This word toxic really bothers me. I don't like the phrase toxic masculinity.
I agree.
I mean, I think that we as Black men should be looked at as human with flaws, if you will, human with some things we didn't learn how to do. And it does not make us, that word toxic puts such a blemish, puts such a black mark or check mark on me as a person, and takes away my humanness to be okay in my own world. Yes, I understand this whole concept of toxic masculinity, but I think that from historical perspectives, it has grown and grown, and it automatically causes we as Black men to view ourselves or to push back or to become even more aggressive in our behaviors because you're telling me something's wrong with me.
Yeah, yep. Absolutely.
And Gerald, I wanted to give you an opportunity also.
I really wasn't gonna say a lot because I think a lot has been spoken about already. But I do think one piece about toxic, non-toxic is context, right?
Mhm.
It's not just that it's cohort effects or like where you like what age you grew up in, but it's also where and how you grew up, right? So I have a friend, she has a partner, and we talk a lot about him being silent. The conversation is, well, I don't know if he cares about me. I said, well, does he do what you ask him to do? Well, yes. Well, does he show up when you ask him to show up? Well, yes. Well, he doesn't really say anything. I said, well, have you told him that's what you wanted? Well, no. I said, well, why? She said, because I run the risk of being rejected by him if I tell him what I need. I say, well, if you don't teach him what you need, how then can he give you what you need? And so the conversation about toxic or those kinds of things have to be very, very context specific. Because if you take somebody who is from where I'm from, Third Ward, Houston, Texas, right? And you don't properly give them the tools to exist in where I am now, academia, of course I'm gonna be toxic. Of course, because the rules of the game where I live say you got to exist this way, and if you don't, you may not come home, right? And the rules of the game where I am now are very similar, but they're slightly different. So instead of presenting myself as being the biggest in the room or the loudest in the room, I just have to be the smartest in the room. I don't have to be the one that runs to and but I have to be the one that's the best in the room so that I can stand a chance living in a place that's super political and very cutthroat. And I'm not talking about my university as it stands. I'm talking about academia as a whole. So toxic, I think is context specific, and because you can't define it as a broad brush because not every behavior itself is toxic. It may be toxic in a certain environment, but if you put that in a different environment, that behavior is protective, it is productive, it is necessary to make it.
Right.
And thank you all for those definitions. I want to say two things really just stood out to me there. And I wanted to go back to Pastor Owen, what you said about unhealthy. And it's like if it's being unhealthy for the person and the people around them. But what if it's normal to me? I don't recognize it as being unhealthy.
That happens a lot. You know, a lot of times people are functioning through dysfunction, and you don't realize it. And sometimes you literally could be praying or saying, you know, why things always happen to me, still not seeing that you're participating in creating a lot of, you know, what's falling around in your life. You know, so. I think that's when these kind of conversations become helpful, particularly when they're sprinkled with a lot of grace and a lot of compassion, because I think, back to Dr. Cunningham, I want to co-sign that, you know, you have to be graceful and compassionate about how you speak to people or they check out. And I feel like we don't work hard enough to draw people in. So the idea is, these conversations can be productive in the way that they'll let somebody stop for a minute, step back and see, oh, I'm participating in this. This is not healthy. This is not productive, because you cannot see it. It's like your mom looking for her glasses and they're up on her head, or your teacher, right? You're like, where are my glasses? And it's up on your head. And some people have their phone, they be talking on the phone, looking for their phone, right? Holding it in their hand so much. sometimes things can be right there in your face and you not be able to catch it. And unfortunately, you can be being very toxic and not realize that you are.
I think also one of the big things, just piggyback on you, is the fact that there needs to be an increase on how people communicate across the board. And when I say communicate, I mean the hearing as well as the saying, and be able and have and learn enough emotional intelligence about yourself that you can have candid conversations without it becoming dysfunctional or quote unquote toxic, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And Mason, I wanted to go back also to something you said, and thank you for, listing what you felt like was toxic on your journey to manhood. But I want to talk a little bit more about that, like, because you said you learned some stuff from your father. So my question is, what have you learned about masculinity on your journey to manhood, and who did you learn that from? And have you identified those things and how to be unhealthy or toxic, or however we're defining it, and how does it present today in your journey?
Well, thank you for the question. That question alone could be an hour long. I'm going to narrow it down that my dad has been a very big influence on how I define masculinity. His number one attribute was work ethic. He taught it, he displayed it, he illustrated it. But what he wasn't great at was verbalizing. So I saw him work 2 or 3 jobs. I saw him bring home flowers when it wasn't my mother's birthday or Valentine's Day. I saw him do some things that brought positive results that I was able to inherit. But also me growing up in Queens, New York, in the middle of Linden Boulevard, Farmers Boulevard, Murdoch, Cambria, Hollis Crew. There are some things I had to develop, like de-escalation skills, learning how to deflect, because the locker room and the lunchroom was very, very raw, very, very aggressive. And if you didn't know how to deflect or de-escalate, you can get swallowed up. So like Dr. Gerald was saying, you have to behave in one way, in one area, one demographic, that it actually works for you. But as you get older in corporate America, you become a parent and a dad, it doesn't work for you. I should not be in competition with my spouse. I should not be competing with my spouse. My spouse should be my partner, not my competitor. I need to compete in the boardroom, not in the bedroom. So my masculinity is around surrounding myself with other positive men who can reaffirm the things that I'm doing. For example, as a young boy, as a teenager, we all went through walking across a dance, trying to ask a girl to dance in the middle of other girls. And if you got rejected, that walk back to your boys was a beast. How do you save face when you were just rejected? Soon as you get back to your circle, you were clowned by all of them. So that was a double negative. You were rejected by the woman, and then you were rejected by your boys. So as you get older, we should have a space among our men to encourage us to move forward when the world rejects us. Thank you.
To jump behind that, though, as I'm listening to Brother Troy talk like he's talking, I think another big aspect of reaching, the masses of men out here is, I guess, and you use the term, Dr. Nick, about creating safe spaces, but I think just another thing about reaching them is not forcing all men to fit into one particular style of masculinity, right? Because I think that's what it is. It's like we almost make guys feel like we all gotta to be masculine is almost like, without us defining it, it just jumps up in your mind to come off as kind of forceful, aggressive, taking what you want, and so then guys don't have any. I mean, when we talk about raising those communication skills, Dr. Cunningham, I guess really defining masculinity in multiple ways and allowing guys to say, I'm still a man, even if I don't, run women. Because there's some guys that just don't run women. That doesn't mean that they're not a man. It's some guys who don't gamble. Don't mean that I'm man. There's some guys who don't drink. I got friends who don't drink alcohol, but smoke, and some that smoke and don't drink alcohol, and then some that don't do anything. But they're all guys. And I just feel like, we allowing guys to, but I've been in that situation. You talk about Brother Troy, walking back to your friends or being around friends where, like, if you didn't show up a certain way, masculine, you were going to get, talk, you're going to laugh at you at least. And it hurts your ego, and it makes you go home and kind of turn on yourself a little bit, privately. So.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in and I'm going to say, but what you all are talking about, though, is yes, not being a monolith of what it is to be a man, but what we're leaving out is the fact that culturally, we're told that this is what it is to be a man. So you have culture and you have society saying and defining what it is to be a man, but we all know as men that for us, masculinity is a moving target based on what you feel comfortable with and where you are in your life's journey. So it's coming to some sort of congruence between those things. And how do you do that?
Go ahead, Mason.
Well, I'll jump in. I'm gonna jump in right now. For those who don't have their steel toe boots on, be careful because I'm about to step on some toes. And I'm gonna draw our women into the conversation. And I'm gonna say it very directly. I can't right now, presently, go home and tell my wife that I had a hard day at work and my feelings got hurt. That right now is a problem culturally where our women have not created, or we have not partnered with our women enough where I can come home and be vulnerable, even to my wife, to a point where so vulnerable I can go home and put my head on her shoulders and say I had a bad day because somebody hurt my feelings. That platform doesn't exist. Well, for me anyway. And I'm not sure, I need help from the panelists to see should that even ever exist. So with me growing up where I have 4 principles that I tried to live by while being purposely driven, a problem solver, a protector, and a provider. Those are the skills as manhood with, different layers of category goes under that, but those top 4 is something that we can carry on and bring forth some positive results. Because Dr. Gerald always says that older men, who myself over 40, are very solution and goal oriented. And we don't really take enough time to build the emotional and the spiritual basis of manhood, not just the behavioral.
Real quick, I just wanted to throw one thing in before you jump in, and that is, I remember talking to some men very candidly and talking to them and telling them, it's all right to cry in front of your lady, right? But don't cry too long, because I knew that you can have 10 minutes of crying, but you can't cry 15 minutes because your girl who loves you will start looking at you sideways, because she starts questioning, am I really with somebody who can take care of me, can provide for me? She will start to question that. And so real quick, for a solution, in my mind, and it's not just men that get on you when you don't show up in a certain masculine way. Sometimes it's the women in our lives or around us in the community that will also say that ain't real masculine, and they're with it. So I think some of this is going to have to die out generationally. I don't think it's a solution. I don't think it's a counseling or a class or a TV show or anything that can actually transform it. I think some of it's a generation of women who grew up and under our parents and grandparents, and this is generational. But I know my daughter, my kids, they're younger, they're in their 20s. They think much differently. And so I think it's just going to have to kind of be almost watered out or rinsed out, you know what I'm saying, to really change it.
I think that, am I muted? Okay. I think that a lot of times also when it comes to these types of issues, and I'm assuming that this goes into relationships, if you will, that we've got to also, number one, know how to communicate what our expectations are from that other person. If I'm not letting her know this is who I am and this is what I need from you, and if that's not what she's looking for from a man, then that's not the best relationship you need to be in. Because you're always going to be running up against, there's never ever going to be any safe space to be vulnerable or to relay, I had a bad day at work, my feelings got hurt.
So Dr. Cunningham, real quick, when you say that, I think a lot of people can think that, but it doesn't feel realistic to pull the trigger, right? You can communicate with somebody and realize that they're not really open to you being that kind of masculine or that kind of open. And then you have to ask yourself, do I really want to leave my relationship that feels like 70% of it or 80% of it is good, but I don't have the room to express myself this way? Do you want to leave that? I think people...
It depends on how important that is to you.
Part of that is also owning that is a generational bias.
Yeah.
Little boy was taught, do not cry, do not be emotional. So part of that is when a man cry, come back and just say to your spouse or whoever it is, thank you, baby, for allowing me to be vulnerable. Let her know.
What if she doesn't let you, though? I mean, without her feel. I mean, like, I think when a woman starts questioning that masculine thing about her man, he knows it. She may not come out and say, why you crying like a girl? She might not say that, but her energy can shift in a way where you can see the concern at you crying, or you being that vulnerable, or you saying this hurt you. She'd be like, you might even catch her talking to one of her girlfriends and hear her saying, it's ways you can detect it. And I'm like, I don't know exactly what to do about it, especially if, like Dr. Cunningham said, I could see us in this generation having the conversation and saying, I know what I need, you know what you need, how do you feel about this? But what if somebody is really honest with you and they say, well, I don't want a man who feels that emotionally open or whatever. What if she says, I'm not used to it. My father was very strong, my brothers are strong, and you being communicative like this or whatever is too much for me. And yeah, in an extreme sense, it's easy to walk away from a relationship, but I'm saying, what if the relationship is kind of...
But I think that's where you have to evaluate the relationship. And honestly, I don't think that it's on the responsibility of your partner. It's you. There's more than one person in that relationship. You have a responsibility in that relationship too, and you have to teach them how to love you. You have to teach them and share with them. And if they're not picking that up, and if they're not receptive to it, then you have to evaluate: is this a relationship for me?
Absolutely.
Because if they're not meeting a need that you have, then that's not where you need to be.
It's hard to let it go, to walk away when it's like in it.
It's hard. It's hard, but see, that's where that's where relationships start to become toxic, because you're afraid to walk away from a bad situation.
Yes.
That's where I come in at. I try to teach that. That's one of my main thrusts is letting go is just as important as holding on. That's
Absolutely.
And I think what it does is it speaks to our personhood, right? Like when you get committed, when you get married, when you get in these relationships, what you're saying is I'm going to be with you no matter who you are. But what we're not saying, but subtly agreeing to, is everyone can change but me, which is unfortunate, because what you're saying is who you are today, I will be with for the rest of my life. Not really being honest enough to say, you're not going to be the same person in 6 months, because you can't be. Like if your skin cells are different and your hair follicles are different and your toenails are different in 6 months, then why would I expect you to be the same person? And as it relates to men, specifically Black men, we are the people, the one version of man that struggles to get the affirmation that says you can change too, brother. Like you can be who you are and you can grow and evolve too. Like every other man gets to, but when it comes to Black men, there seems to be this rift between like our ability and desire to want to evolve and the support that we need to do that. Because if we're telling the truth, like I talked about being from Third Ward, Houston, Texas, what I learned there has been super beneficial to getting me here, but not all rules apply. I can't do everything there that I do here because some of the stuff, I'm a little older, I'm a little, I can't run up in nobody's mouth. I can't do those things because that'll give me the things that I work so hard for, my license, my job, my degrees. I'll go to jail and they'll take all of that from me no matter what the situation was if I run up in somebody's mouth. So what I got to learn now is the rules to the game. And unfortunately, many of the men who struggle with understanding what does it mean to be a man for me now don't have people with which they get to parse out the rules to the game. Because it's a new game. It's a brand new game.
Yes.
We're playing by old rules.
Yes.
So what I heard you say is that it's important to evolve. Like as men, you've evolved from things that your parents taught you.
It's important to be allowed to evolve, I think is what's really important. Because, so case in point, so I am where I am today because men took me aside along the way and showed me how to do it. I love my dad. My dad is a great man. Rest in peace, Pops. He's a great man. And he showed me how to go to work and come home. That's what, in terms of how to do the other things, so how to pay a bill, I got that from my big brother Dietrich. In terms of how to be a spiritual man, I got that from my big brother Randon. In terms of how to be a man who communicates, I got that from my former mentor, Dr. Kamal Ojinga Sawatu. In terms of how to be a man of faculty and this, I got that from him. In terms of how to be a black male clinician, I got that from the black male clinicians that I know, black men who are clinicians that I know. And so each one of these spaces taught me, but not every man is as fortunate as I was.
Mhm.
And so I think when we start to examine men in comparison to me or Dr. Cunningham or Mace or Dr. Battle or Pastor Owens, we do them a disservice because we're looking at them through lenses that don't fit for them. My life is mine. Your partner's life, your friend's life, your cousin's life, your brother's life has very different rules. Like I said, I can't run up in nobody's mouth, but they may have to in order to make it home safe. Or they may have to go to a job and be real quiet because the boss is one of them people that got real sticky feelings. And if you say anything or you do anything, you can lose your job. So when they come home, they may not have, I ain't got no words because 5 days a week, 6 days a week, I got to go to this place and I got to keep my opinion to myself, keep my thoughts to myself so I can bring this check home and make sure our kids have a chance.
That's real.
True. Thank you for that. So community is important or not?
Absolutely.
I think that community is important, and I think, like Dr. Penny said, is we have to, as men, be there for each other and be supportive of each other. And one of the things that we talked about earlier was we talked about the roles of like fathers and uncles and all of these, and it's like somewhere that's gotten lost. It still exists, it still happens, but men don't get the shine that women get, especially in our community. You always hear about the aunties and all of that stuff, but nobody ever talks about the roles that all of these different men are playing. But on the flip side, we talk about the deadbeat dads and all of the things that we're not doing. And I'm not one that's advocating saying that we need to be praised for doing what we're supposed to, but we do need to not be beat up so much on. And it does need to be acknowledged the things that we are doing, and we need to be supported. And I think that that even with like the topic, because we've wrestled with calling it toxic masculinity, and it's not necessarily the masculinity that's toxic, it's behaviors that are toxic, right? And it's not, but when that's what it's called, and because we're dealing with, let's be honest, we're dealing with white terminology here, right? And that's what we have access to. A lot of the behaviors and the ways that Black men can express or feel comfortable expressing their masculinity are the more toxic ways. That's what you're referencing. You're not necessarily saying that the fact that we're masculine is toxic. And I think that also gets lost because a lot of times, to your point, Dr. Lafitte, when you started the conversation, nobody explains what they're talking about when they're talking about toxic masculinity. What will happen is that will get thrown out towards a Black man and saying, you're that's just your toxic masculinity.
Yes, absolutely. I just wanted to throw in there real quick because Dr. Lafitte, when you mentioned community being important and what Dr. Penny said, one of the things I struggled with coming up was my father was a major presence in my life. I had other great men that came down my path. I think that one of the things that always threw me off was that I think there's a difference between a supporter, a male who supports another man, versus a mentor. And I think that mentorship should be exclusively, it should just be defined more so of if I'm choosing to go in a particular discipline. Dr. Penny talked about becoming a clinician. Following other Black clinicians, they can show you the way. If you're trying to be a minister can show you the way. But when it comes to life, I can't really show you how to live your life. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where I think it's got to shift to Black men supporting Black men, which is more so being a listening ear, being an encourager, helping them, hash out and comb through their ideas about what they think they might want to get into. In other words, I'm saying that sometimes when you come to people for their support, they start mentoring you. And that means they start trying to shape the direction that you're going in. And you're like, well, that's not really where I was actually trying to go. And so then you have to either take the mentorship that's going to put you in another path that's not where you're going, or deny it, and then you don't have anyone, because again, instead of just supporting you, it turns into more of I'm gonna channel you into what I think you should be. And so I just think that's an important thing just to highlight.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about what Dr. Nick said. He mentioned unhealthy behaviors that are toxic. What happens, or what are your thoughts on when behaviors that are viewed are toxic and they're really not? Assertive versus aggression. Anyone?
Well, even the conversation about assertiveness versus aggression is context specific, right? Like if I'm on the battlefield, I need to be quote unquote aggressive, right? If I'm in the boardroom, I need to be quote unquote aggressive. But the way that it looks is dependent upon the lens with which you're looking at it. Like, once again, so in my profession, being a clinician, being an academic, whatever person, I still have to be aggressive. I got to go out and find projects. I got to go out and find research studies. I got to go out and find opportunities to serve and to teach well. These are all signs of aggression in how you do them, but they look different because I got on the bow tie every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or because I speak to you instead of saying, hey man, fuck this. But if you catch me watching a basketball game, a football game, or something that I'm passionate, you'll definitely hear these same words come out my mouth. And so I think even in how we understand words assertive versus aggressive, we got to be very, very cautious because those words, everybody's got a version of them in their head. They're even versions of them in a dictionary, but they're not context considered. They're not considered for the context, right? A salesman is aggressive because that's how his family eats. I got to run up in your face. I got to ask you about stuff I know you don't want. But I got to try to sell it to you, even if I know you don't want it, and it ain't going to benefit you because my kids got to eat. And I love you, Pastor Orange, you my dude. But see, you see that little baby down there that's 3 years old? I have a responsibility to that kid. And so I got to be aggressive to make sure that my babies are okay. And I think assertiveness is the same thing. It's just, it feels better in certain contexts than what aggression may feel. It's the same thing. It's just, it's aggression light, in my opinion. That's because I'm a clown, so.
I have a quick caution, and that is just a quick caution, and that is, I think accuracy is very key. In other words, for each individual to try to be very accurate about how they define aggression or being, combative or whatever. You need to really define those things clearly for yourself so that you know where you are. Because I think one of the challenging things about human interaction, social interaction, is that we run into people who are manipulators or are going through something their own selves, and anything you say or do, they can call aggressive and then label you as toxic, or anything if you challenge them at all, you're seen as against them, So people will manipulate you that way. They'll use these terms against you unless you're clear about the difference between being aggressive versus being graceful, challenging, or you follow what I'm saying? You need to be very accurate and clear about the way you're defining those things so that you can't be manipulated. And when you see somebody who's trying to use it against you, you know what that is, because if not, you'll kind of be jumping back and forth trying to adjust for everybody you speak to. And depending on what their motive is,
Right, and I think a lot of it is perception. And so I'm going to pick on Dr. Cunningham and Troy right now because they're big. And so what I do or say, because I'm a small guy, may not be perceived as aggressive, and they could do the exact same thing. And so I think a lot of this too is, and I'm just address the elephant in the room. We're looking at this. We're examining Black culture, Black people, Black masculinity through a Eurocentric lens, right? The terminology that we're using is Eurocentric, right? And so a lot of our behaviors based on that lens in our society, because the white patriarchy is in control of our society, will then dictate and define what we do. So Black people culturally, we speak with our hands. Like that, I mean, there have been 4 of us talking, and each one of us at some point in this conversation has, right? And the moment we do this, that is perceived by certain people as aggression, right? Yes. And so, and I go back to the term toxic masculinity again. So then that is a term that they came up with. That is a phrase that they came up with, right? Now we've adopted it, and that's been thrown on us. And when people, again, are not defining it, like you said, and being very intentional in the words and explaining why they're saying that was aggressive versus assertive, why they're saying that, you know, that you were conceited versus being confident, right? And it literally, in the boardroom or in any space, a white man can do the same thing that you did as a black man,
Absolutely.
right? But you were—
I was going to say that earlier, Nick. We are cursed.
dancing around it.
We
Yeah.
are cursed from the very beginning because of the color of our skin. The color of our skin screams aggression. And when we add the antics of the hands, when we're just explaining our perspective on something, all of that,
Yes.
all of that is brought into this whole concept of aggression or toxic or dysfunctional. I mean, you can see me now. I talk with my hands. I talk with my hands even in sessions. But from a societal standpoint, when we're doing those things, that Eurocentric label of toxic masculinity gets pushed right on our foreheads, and we have to wear that.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna come from a different perspective. Because I am a large guy, 6 feet, over 275 pounds, my demeanor and my hand gestures actually change based on where I am. I'm also from a sports background. As a linebacker, aggression works for you. Spontaneous aggression works for you. So now I have a space to physically get out stress, anger. I have a space and a forum to be physical, and it can work for me. I can't use them same skills in corporate America, at work, or in sessions. I can't use that technique to get rid of stress. And my hand signals actually change, what we call code switching, from the time I get home, by the time I get to work, and by the time I'm in the field. I'll give you a real example. I live in a very, should I say, white community. And my hand gesture when I say hello is open-handed in front. Hello. Because one, like you said, I have one, I'm Black, but I'm also large in demeanor. I'm not the smallest French fry in the Happy Meal.
No.
So I have to be very cautious on how I display behavior based on where I am. When I go into the city, I can see one of my brothers or cohort and say, peace, what's going on? And among my personals, I don't even have to use no hand signals. I can use a head nod. So different signals mean different things by the time I go to work and by the time I get home. So masculinity can be displayed physically on sports in a way where it can work for you, but assertiveness is influence. I'm still from that era and in the position where you gotta wait till your daddy get home still means something. That's assertive. That means I have influence in the community or at home. So when someone says, wait till your daddy get home, that should still mean something.
But, you know, going back to the topic, well, part of the topic of our conversation is that little boy. And these little boys that are coming up now are from a different generation. Therefore, we have to approach them from a different perspective. They are so influenced by social media and what masculinity looks like on social media, because that's just the generation that they're in right now. So we have to be very, very careful how we raise or mentor or support these young kings that are coming up in our world today, to make sure that they are, hopefully the term toxic will dissipate, but to give them a foundation of knowing who they are, knowing how to portray who they are to the world, so as not to be viewed as continued or this longevity of toxic masculinity, if you will.
And to your point, real quick, Dr. Cunningham, I think the generation now, our generation above us, you know, and down, we have to stop looking back at the younger generation coming up and labeling everything that they do. I think if you don't want to be labeled, you have to kind of stop teaching the next generation to label everything, right? Trying to put it and to slapping a negative, broad, far-reaching label on everyone, because some of the things that this young generation that they like to do, like most of the boys play video games, where I come from a generation where we did go outside. We were told to go outside and we played and it was just more rugged. It was in trees, it was in the woods. It wasn't all video and online and stuff like that. But I think that's my sons now, my youngest son, just because they play games online, I don't choose to judge that as less than what I was. It's just different. And so I feel like when we do label it, we're actually subconsciously teaching them to turn around and label again and label something in front of them. And slapping labels on everything is not good, because I don't think we're that good. We're smart, we're brilliant people, but I don't think we're that good to think we can stand in our own lives and constantly be able to just label everybody and everything around us, and we're dead on.
Right, and I think that, again, it's behaviors, right? When you're talking about a behavior, talk about the behavior. But when you label toxic masculinity, it's kind of like you're saying that all masculinity is toxic, and when it's really it's really white, right? Like I'm just gonna be honest, it's really white. Like I can't. Okay, and it's the fact that these white men are doing things in a certain way, right? And it's oppressing, and I'm gonna be honest, it's oppressing white women. That let's just put it out there, okay? Because we keep dancing around this thing, and I know y'all, because we talked earlier, so I know y'all have more than this. Like, it's white women felt that white men were oppressing them, and they wanted to label the oppressive behaviors that these white men were doing to them, and they started labeling those behaviors as toxic masculinity. It just so happened that the toxic behaviors that these men had, because they are the ones in power, were the only things that, for many of us, were ways that we could express our masculinity as Black men, right? We're not in a position, for a lot of different reasons, to go into organizations and be the head of industry, right? We're not in positions for a lot of reasons, even though Dr. Penny is in working in education, that's a very tough field for us to get into. And when we get into it, you're still fighting to be in that position, right? So we're not in because of the way that our culture and society has been set up, there are a lot of places and spaces that we can't go into, and that would allow us to be able to express our masculinity, right? So we express it in the places that we have available to us, right? And we express it in the ways that we have available to us. We talked about talking about your feelings. We haven't been told that it's okay. Everything that we're talking about being a man, from what you watch on television, from what you see on the internet, talking about your emotions is a taboo, is a no-go. However, white men can do it very freely. White men can be mad, they can be mad, they can be happy, they can be sad, they have a full range of emotions. Black men, like, we are limited in the ways in the emotions that we can express. Like you all have said, like our happiness sometimes can look angry, right? Our anger can look, our sad can look angry. Like we have many different ways for anger, but like that's like kind of all we have, right? And that's because go ahead, Dr. Cunningham.
I think it's difficult to make this big transition from toxic masculinity to humanism, or to emotional awareness, because there is so much working against the Black man. And I think that the media plays a profound part in keeping us right where they want us, keeping us thinking about us right the way they want us to be thinking about ourselves, because they keep making these movies, making these shows that portray toxicity, instead of more quality programs about the human side, the vulnerable side, but also the strong side of Black men that does not automatically include violence or drugs or whatever the case may be.
But isn't that the goal of racism, though? To keep us distracted from the work, to keep us exhausted.
But if we don't have conversation about this, and if we don't start making demands about this, it'll never change.
Right. And I think, so although, I get a lot of pushback from this, like, these are the things that break my heart about BET, right? Because BET, when I was growing up, BET with Teen Summit, like we had 106 & Park, so BET was the central place for for Black people to understand each other from different areas. Me being in Houston, I still got to see the same thing as people in New York. Tavis Smart, all of that, like Video Soul Go, these are things that, and we don't have that place anymore that we
BET
can
is
all
for
go
women.
to. Well, but BET isn't even really just for women. BET is truthfully for white women. Because if you look at the offerings there, they have a very specific type of Black woman interaction. Like so if you look at Sisters, right, it's Tyler Perry's version of Girlfriends, but it's not nearly as good. If you look at the Oval, it's Tyler Perry's version of Shonda Land Scandal, but not nearly that good. And so what we're looking at now is there are these representations that we used to hold on to, these bastions of Black culture that we don't have anymore. I was on Twitter the other day, and it was a person said, I've been poor, but I ain't never been so poor as to have a fried leg sandwich with hot sauce on it and white bread. What? That's good eating. That's a meal. That is a meal. Okay? Listen, whoever put that need to be fought on in the face, because that is food. That is love. And so because of this, because of the fact that so many of the things that we call special and sacred as Black people, we don't have that anymore because somebody has taken it and they made it into a thing, and Black culture isn't ours anymore, and people are profiting off of it, but not us. This is here we are. We're struggling now to figure out what's okay to do. And I think once again, everybody gets to evolve and change, but us.
Well,
right?
I agree with Dr. Cunningham that, you know, our entertainment and our comedians do reinforce these horrible stereotypes. And so when they make the joke and then we laugh at the joke and we support the joke, it's hard for us to move beyond the joke. Like Dr. Penny, I'm not picking on you, but you made the joke about fried chicken is like good eating, right? It is good eating, but it's kind of what those comedians do, right? They'll say this stereotype, which is true, but we all love chicken. Black people love chicken. But again, at some point now, we're enough years into this understanding that we like chicken that we don't have to actually talk about it, associating it with Black people anymore. Kool-Aid and chicken, we don't have to do that. And I think we can be, we can grow. And as far as what's going to get us out of it, you talked about evolving and so forth. I think I think the answer is that some of it we're not going to counsel out and we're not going to have a major transformation. It's going to be really all of us in this generation really reaching back and loving on the kids, supporting them, training them up in a different way. And as they go forward, it kind of will like rinse itself out. It will kind of rinse it. That's the way I see it. I think the change that we're looking for is so slow and it's progressive. It's happening. It's actually happening, but it's very slow. Like Obama was a lot of progress, but we also saw that it showed us, and Donald Trump after him showed us that it wasn't as far as you thought it was. Even though it was progress, it wasn't as far as you thought it was, but it's happening. It takes a long time. It's going to take some generations. It's going to take our great-grandchildren to get to where I think we're hoping to see one day, but our great-grandchildren.
Well, and I think I'm sorry, Dr. Lafitte, do you want to?
I was just going to ask, how do we teach that?
Yeah, and so that kind of piggybacks on what I was going to say, because I was going to say to Dr. Penny's point, with BET. So before you did have, when BET was owned by us, you got to see a spectrum of Blackness, right? And with that, you also got to see a spectrum of Black masculinity, to bring it back to this topic, right? And so it was expressed in many different ways. And so when we no longer own our own stuff, we're dealing with other people creating our narrative of what it is to be us. And as we've seen with that, they've then given us all of the toxic things, right? There are no, and I'm going to use Bill Cosby as an example. He's problematic. However, the Cosby Show, you got to see different ways of masculinity being expressed on the Cosby Show, even with the way that he related to Theo, right? Again, Family Matters, which was problematic, but you got to see a Black father expressing his masculinity in different ways with the relationship to his daughters, with his wife, with his son, right? But those things are no longer there. We've lost those things. And now other people are writing our narratives, and they're writing us out.
Well, so hold on. So it's not that they're not there, it's just they're premium television now, right? So although The Chi is problematic through and through, The Chi is a really good example of black boyhood trying to figure itself out. Because if you so I don't know if you watched the show The Chi on Showtime or whatever. I love this show. It's one of my favorite shows. I hate the chaos that's in season 4, but we can talk about that another day at a different time. But if you look at the black boys and black men in that show, so from season 1 to season 2, it was about Brandon. Brandon lost his brother who was in the wrong place at the wrong time doing stuff. Like, so he was just being there and he died. And Brandon's maturation process was growing through that. We lost Brandon in season 3, and so it's been about Kevin and Emmett ever since then. So you're watching black boys try to figure out, what does it mean to have a girlfriend? And what does it mean to find love? And what does it mean to show up for your mom when you're hurting as well? And what does it mean to go to work when you hate the place that you work, but you can't leave yet because you don't have enough money and you have a partner who comes from a space that you don't know much about, right? So Brandon is a really good archetype of what it means to be a black man who wants to evolve and change, but find very few spaces to do so.
I also think that in that show, there's a lot of subtle cues of mentorship
Yes.
all along the way.
Yes.
If you don't recognize it, you'll only focus on the negative aspects of what's happening. But there are a lot of mentorship support for these young boys coming up. That's key.
Yeah, and a lot of it even is peer to peer, because if you look at Papa, Jake, and Kevin's relationship, Papa has always been this like, hey, bro, I want better for myself and I want better for y'all. Even when Jake was getting into the gang with his brother, Papa was always like, hey, this is just Jake, but we got to love him anyway. These conversations are things that black people who don't have money can't participate in. And a lot of us don't have money. So it's not that they're not there, it's that we can't afford to see them. And that's on purpose. That's on purpose.
So I've been monitoring the chat, and they've talked about Tyler Perry. We ain't gonna get on Tyler. I was on another. I ain't gonna do that today. But they brought up Lovecraft Country, and so we saw the relationships in Lovecraft Country with masculinity and with men. And part of the reason why I want to bring that up is because we haven't talked about it. And Dr. Penny, you and I talked about it initially, was queer relationships, right? Because masculinity has so many different variations and ways of expressing it. But they dealt with that. And you saw the resolution between the father and the son, right? Dad was very toxic, but he was toxic because he was battling his own demons, which kept him, from being able to relate to his son. But as soon as he within himself created a space to be okay with it, he was able to change his relationship with his son and do different than what he was doing. And I think that, you're right. Those things do exist. Those narratives do exist, but they're the premium package. And a lot of times too, we get so caught up in the entertainment value that we're missing those things. Right. And so, but I think that that's very important. Like we have to see ourselves in different lights and in different ways.
We get so caught up in shows and entertainment and how it's being monetized, but we lose the value and the sense of community and being able to connect with the community and really to have those type of discussions within the community. So what are some ways that we can go out into the community? We can have these type of conversations with other young boys and men. How do we do that? What are your suggestions?
Number one, I would definitely say, again, approach young men as supportive and not always, necessarily trying to, predict their direction or destination. Support, really encourage, inform them, let them know what their options are. Let them ask questions. Let them feel secure and respected. I think those are ways to approach it, and I think you'll find more young men gravitating towards the wisdom and being willing to listen more and make adjustments and stuff like that. Because again, like I said, 16 is not 16 as it used to be. The 16-year-olds now, they still don't know a whole lot, but they know a whole lot, and if that makes sense. And so they've seen a lot, they've experienced a lot, even if they don't know how to process it perfectly, they've experienced and seen, and they've heard a lot of conversations. And so that's why I say you can't go to these a 15-year-old and think it's like our parents talked to us when we were 15. You just can't do that. So I would say just the approach is the number one thing from the start.
I think also we have to open up venues such as the church, because there's a lot of young Black men, Black boys in church who don't have direction still. Even though they're in church, they still don't have direction. There are some community centers that are becoming activated. We have to be able to go into these types of venues, the barbershops, anywhere, and have candid conversations, not preach at them, not talk at them, but talk to them, talk with them. Ask them questions like, man, what's your dream? Things like that makes them think. And if they give you surface stuff, you might have to dig a little deeper and give examples of what's possible, based on what you know about them or the direction that they're going. We just have to open up and be willing to have these candid conversations. I mean, a perfect example, in my neighborhood, I would sit outside smoking my cigars, and I would see this young man, had to be probably, I thought he was about 15, 16 or 17. And all he did was go from one end of the street to the next, over to the playground and back all day long. I'm thinking he should be in school. So I called him over one day and I asked him, I said, man, how old are you? He told me he was 18 years old. I said, what are you doing with yourself? And he had no answer at 18, had no direction at 18. So I just started, every time I saw him, I had a conversation with him. What do you do for yourself today? What are you doing? We have to be assertive in our efforts to change the mindset of what these kids see on TV and bring them back to reality of what's possible. Because if we really get down to the nitty-gritty, we can achieve any, motherfucking thing we want in this world.
Absolutely.
If we make the right decisions and make a plan. And that's all it takes.
Thank you for that, Dr. Cunningham. I definitely agree. Definitely. Anyone else?
I'm sorry for that language, but
Dr.
It's
Sutherland
perfectly
has a
fine. This is an open and safe space.
Dr. Sutherland, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Well, no, I was just applauding my brother, Dr. Cunningham, over there. He's pretty good.
Thank you, Alan.
I do think, real quick, we talked a lot about the posture of how to show up to young Black boys and young Black men. I also think we need, like, for me, it was beneficial to me that Black men were willing to open up their network to me, because I got to see what other Black men got to do, right? So not all of us are fraternal. Like, not all of us have a fraternity that we're part of in terms of like something that's Greek or something that's organized that way, but we all have a fraternity that we're part of in terms of our brotherhood or the spaces that we occupy. And I think a lot of Black boys, young Black men, struggle to figure out what's possible beyond what they can see, even on social media. Because the thing about social media is it lies so well. It lies to you so well, right? It tells you that all your partners is doing 1, 2, and 3, and and whoop, 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 right? But let's say that you're like a young man who can kind of hoop, but you kind of can't, and you're kind of smart, but you kind of ain't, and you kind of like school, but you kind of don't. So then what do you do? Because you're not going to college because you can't afford it, right? Unless you're taking out loans. And are you really dedicated $50,000 for a degree that you might not want? Like, and so we talk a lot about trade schools, but do we really talk about the process? Like, so once you're in a trade school, how do you go from being an apprentice to being a master? How long would that take me? What does that money look like? How do I get involved in the spaces? And a lot of that is resource oriented. So Dr. Cunningham, you brought up a beautiful point about doing anything we want to, as long as there's a plan in place and determination, right? One of the things we know about racism is that it's not always overt, and it doesn't always look the same way. So one of the things that white people do that we don't have a chance to do yet is that they open their network to their kids for internships and stuff like that, right? So for me, as a clinician, I got my own little side hustle that's beyond the academic space. So if I open my network to a kid that I'm mentoring, hey, come over here with me, kid, and do this part for me. Like, just look at this paperwork. You ain't got to look at no names. It can all be redacted, all of that kind of stuff. But I can teach you what it's like to work in the office so that you don't have to work with your hands if you don't want to. I can teach you how to use the language and give you the rules, so how to maneuver so that your aggression outside can be used inside in a way that is more palatable to people that you want to work with. And so I do think, Dr. Cunningham, you are spot on in the plan. And I do think that it takes supporters and mentors to take that plan from being on paper to making that thing a reality. Because without that door opening, it's going to be real, real hard for some of us to go to some of the places we want to go to.
I think also we have to start putting pressure on the educational system to put monies into the hiring of teachers of color, men teachers of color.
Yeah.
Because again, the kids spend the majority, 8 hours of their long day in the classroom with a white male or female that's not teaching them how to be a Black man.
And I think the other thing too, though, with that, Dr. Cunningham, is when these Black male teachers are hired, they're not hired as disciplinarians. Right? Because then that feeds into the whole stereotype of us being toxic, right? Because then you can't have the relationship with the male student where you're mentoring them and you're helping them and you're showing them how to be a man. Now you're coming in and you're almost the warden in the prison. Right? Because that's what happens to a lot of Black male teachers when they go into education, is any problem child is sent to them. And then I have a client that's a Black male teacher, and he said that then even when he's mentoring and he's working with the child, because he's not doing it in the way that the white professionals want it to be done, then there's a problem with him, right? Because they don't like the way he de-escalated them. He didn't, didn't restrain the child, right? But we know that we have a different way of relating to each other, right? That in the way that we approach as we've talked about already, the way that we approach our young Black brothers, young Black boys, is going to determine, one, how they perceive themselves as they grow into manhood, and two, how they perceive masculinity, right?
Yeah, and I think, in talking about that, I had a conversation with a friend of mine about even the language we use to describe boys, right? Boys and girls that are Black. So what we do is like, so when they get like 15, 16, young Black man, no, they're still a boy. Because if you look at him as a young Black man, you will have man-like expectations for him, and he's still a kid. Even at 18, like at 18, me at 18, no,
Right.
baby. Me even at 22 is still tough, because if we know that the prefrontal cortex doesn't develop fully until 23 to 27, plus or minus 2 years, then it means that we're looking at a 25-year-old person being grown. So somewhere between 18 and 25 is 7 good years. And we treat them once they turn 18, once they turn 17, once they turn 16, honestly, 15, when they get big enough to look like they're a threat, we stop allowing them to be children and make childlike mistakes. And that's problematic because, like, at 15, what can you do? So like Freud talked about like sexual coitus as a thing that you can do and you're then grown, but that ain't true. Because just because you can make a baby don't mean you know how to be a man. And just because you graduate from high school doesn't mean you have the skills to be a man. Shit, just because you graduate from college or graduate school and shit with a PhD doesn't mean you know how to be a man. And so I agree when we talk, when Pastor Orange talked about having supporters and that kind of thing versus having mentors. And that's important because a lot of us, shit, it's lonely out here. Like it's real cold trying to be a Black man, because the weight is on us to be good for our communities, to be good for our families, to be good for the ones coming up. But shit, where do we go when we just got shot by a bullet from the partner that we love or the kid that we're trying to raise? And so it creates this thing where like we come in trying to raise young Black boys and teach them how to be young Black boys with the mentality that once you hit 16 and you're 6'2", that you're grown. And that's tough. Cause shit, I'm really ain't even grown. I love that my mama still call and check on me and give me a hard time because she ain't heard from me. Cause I need somebody to remind me that they care, and that's tough sometimes. Cause who do you turn to?
I mean, and on that, Dr. Penny, I know earlier we talked about the alpha male, beta male, and how that's bullshit, but that's really almost kind of like what you're being groomed to be, is like this alpha, right? And it's like you're just human. kind of like when we said, like, we're going to talk about the human experience of being a man and not label this as necessarily toxic masculinity. There could be some toxic behaviors that we have as humans, which everyone has, but it's the human experience. And it's like, okay, so you're pushing me out. But again, if we harken back to slavery, you know, and when you became able to breed, you were a man, right? That's why at 18, you know, when you're able to procreate, right? Because what we needed you to do was make more of you so that you could work for us for free, right? So we're still kind of, we've built our system and our society off of this. We've changed some words here and there.
Yeah.
We've made something palatable.
Even our Jewish brothers and sisters, you know, I think it's like age 16, I think, when the Jewish young boy is like kind of crossed over into manhood. And as you said, Dr. Penny, even though I feel like our kids, they know a lot, but they don't know a lot. I just feel like you're just not there. You know, my son is my oldest son is 25 right now. And I just remember 2 years ago when he was like 23, hearing him talk, like he would say things that I hadn't heard about, didn't know about, and he's informed about stuff. He's college educated, and he's telling me things, but at the same time, he would come back to me with more common sense things and he had no clue. And I was like, okay, I get this. You know what I'm saying? You know a lot, but you don't know a lot. And so in my mind, 3 years ago when he was like, I guess, 22, turning 23, it clicked for me. You raised him, but now you have to keep going. Like, he still needs more. Keep talking to him, keep on teaching him, keep on checking on him, keep on, you know, because it dawned on me that even though he's living in his own place, got his own car, he's got his degree, and just because he can make a child, he didn't have any kids, but he still needs, that's a lot about this world he needs to learn. And so, yeah.
And we don't have parenting books for that. Ain't no parenting books for raising a 22-year-old. Hey, man, you get it how you live. Good luck, bro. What?
Exactly.
Hold on. You're 22. I don't know. I raised a 16-year-old. Shit, I raised a 12-year-old, but a 22-year-old is a
right.
whole
But I
different.
think that's because your role changes, right?
Yes.
So just like our masculinity changes and what we deem as masculine changes as we grow older, our parenting, our roles as parents change too. So you go from being the parent to being the mentor to being the supporter. Like it changes. It's not consistently the same.
Yes.
Right? As your child grows, their need from you changes, right? And so your role in their life has to change based off of that. So whereas when your child, like you said, Dr. Penny, was 5 or 6, you may have gone in and told them what to do. Like at 22, when he knows some things, oh, okay, yeah. So somebody, one of the people just said the same thing, that as our society at 18, we become very hands off, right? But you still need to be there. And so that the role changes. Like I look at my dad and what our role is. And I will tell you, I changed our relationship, and I changed our relationship based off of the fact that my nephew came to live with me. And you met him, Pastor Owens. My nephew came to live with me when he was 11. So he lived with me from 11 to 13. And I've told my parents, like, him and his sister wanted a larger connection. They don't know who their biological dad is. And so I'm kind of their uncle, but I'm kind of their dad in their mind. And so his wanting the connection with me drove things. Like, he would say, I want to spend time with you. And I'm like, okay, so what do you want to do? He literally wanted to be in the same space with me. Like, and I would be where I was in my doc program. I would be working on papers for school, and he would literally just sit there and he would watch me. Right. And that's what he wanted. Like, he wanted that connection, you know, and he would hug me and he would tell me that he loved me. And my initial response was like to push him away, because that's what we do when boys get a certain age, like them hugging on you and stuff like that. They're not supposed to, but I didn't. I was like, if this is, because one of my big things is, if someone is important to me or to you, what is important to them is important to you. Right. So if this was important to him because he was important to me, I gave it to him. And it totally changed the dynamic of the relationship. And I learned from him, like, okay, well, if that changes how I relate to him and how I communicate with him, if I do the same thing with my dad, maybe that'll change that. So I started telling my dad I love him. My dad says, I love you now, even without me prompting. I saw my dad yesterday. He hugged me. That wasn't the typical, like we would typically do, but he hugged me, right? You
Yeah.
know, but that I learned that from him, and then I started. So I say to say like our roles change, but they still need us, right?
Absolutely. Like it was a big. I'm sorry.
One of our people that's in the discussion also affirmed that, you know, having a Black male counselor at her high school changed the trajectory of a lot of the Black boys at that school because they went to that counselor. So we're needed. We're needed.
It's just about making that adjustment. Like you said, it's different from when you're 5 years old to when you become a teenager to when you become 18, which is like pre-legal, but then 21 is actually legal. And then, because like my son, you know, when my son and daughter in college turned 21, and then they're like calling me out of state and like, hey, dad, or I call them and they're at a bar. That's shocking to me at first because I had to catch myself because I'm like, what are you doing at a bar? But I'm like, you can't control them. They're in the same state right now. And they're actually illegal to be at this bar right now. They're not breaking the law, but it's a different thing. And so now, like you said, the way you talk and the way you teach, all that stuff kind of evolves. And Dr. Penny, you said that it's no manual for it. And sometimes people are not as self-aware to realize what's going on and make the adjustment. And that's where I think some of the toxic, we call it toxic or unhealthy parenting comes in, unhealthy breakdowns come because people don't sense that it's time to shift, like the way I talk to this person or the way I do what I do. So, yeah.
And Dr. Nick, I'm happy that you brought up, you know, the relationship and how that changed over time between you and your father and how you were able to be vulnerable with your nephew. Because sometimes, like some people would say, oh, that's normal. But for you, it was something that needed to be taught. And it's okay to be in those spaces, to be vulnerable, as some people would say. So we have to start normalizing what's vulnerable because it can also be viewed as in an unhealthy way. So we have to teach those things.
Yeah.
And I think that for Black men, that word, and we've talked about, in this discussion, we talked a lot about words and their meanings and how they affect us. But I think that as we've evolved, we have to allow our definitions of words and terms to evolve. I'm sorry, Dr. Penny, but we do as men, as people, we have to do that because Ashley.
That's
So you see it. So
Yeah.
you see what I saw when I seen it because I saw it.
Ashley, you can't see. That's why I said unmute thyself and speak that part.
Because she's shooting. You seen it, huh? You seen she came up with the little Uzi.
You can unmute and say that. Like you can participate in the discussion. Go ahead.
Now, see, I was just sitting here listening. I wasn't going to join in.
You
Go
know better
ahead,
than that.
Ashley.
You my baby. You can't just be. I'm not going to do this with you.
Yeah, Dr. Penny, that's my mentor. So I knew he was going to say something. That's why I was hesitating to even say it. But no, I was just, based on what y'all talking about, you know, parenting and how at 18 we want to say somebody is grown. I'm thinking about it like this. Even at those older ages, 25, 30, I know plenty of men who are so stagnated at those younger ages developmentally because they didn't get the care at that younger age. So we want to come at them in this adult manner, in this grown-like way, or we expect them to know certain things mentally, know certain things emotionally. Well, if you're stagnated at 18 or at 16 or something traumatic happened at those younger ages and you're stuck there, we still as parents need to parent you there. We need to parent you where you are. So it's not a matter of our relationship changes with our children over time. It does, but we also have to recognize where our kids might be stuck. Like my children now, I have 13 and younger, 4 children, 13, 10, 7, and 5. But if I know my children are stuck at a certain point, I'm not going to force them to go past that. We're going to work at that point, and I'm going to show them the tenderness they need at that point. And we tend to forget that even grown people, like I'm 35, I still need my mama's tenderness. I don't care how old I get. That's still what I need. My cousin just lost her mother, and you would think that she was 5 years old in that moment, because what she said was, I don't have a mommy anymore. Like that is taking you back to your childhood where you don't have your mother to hold on to. So we we look at it like we have to change, but do we really? Our relationships don't really have to change. We still need that tenderness. We still need that love, and especially Black men, because this is why we get into those other areas y'all talked about earlier, like toxic masculinity and not knowing how to be tender, not knowing how to be soft, because we feel like, okay, they grown now, they don't need that. No, you always need that. You always need that.
Okay,
That's-
so no, you actually you good. You know you good.
Yeah, I just want to say on the back of what Ashley was saying, and that is, I think you all tell me what you think. I think we should be careful also because when she said, when you find someone who may be of a certain chronological age and you treat them like that, you might realize that they're not ready yet, or they are not developed yet. But the problem is, we in society collectively, we have a negative connotation that we attach to that. Like, when it could be many reasons that you're not ready. You know what I'm saying? It could be many reasons that you're not developed the way you need to be. It's not just because a person is still just trying to act like a child or trying to be immature. It could be many reasons, but whenever we find somebody who is 25 or 30 or 35 and they're still very underdeveloped where they should be mentally, consciously, whatever it is, we kind of label that as a negative thing, and we kind of write people off subconsciously without realizing it. Like, I feel like in public, we talk about being helpful, being advocates, supporting and loving and all of that. But in real life, when you meet somebody and they're not there, you just kind of in your mind mentally make a note and be like, anybody got time for that? They still acting like a child, and we move very fast in a society like that. And so I'm saying that, yeah, maybe a little bit more compassion, not a pass for you to act any way you want to act, holding people accountable, but still just understanding that we haven't walked in people's shoes. We don't know what it was like to grow up as they did with or without parents or however it went.
That's true. And I think a lot of the struggle that we have is we ain't got time. So convenience is a very big deal, right? So like we don't want to be honest, but the thing about what has happened in terms of capitalism and education and success and profession is that it has stifled a lot of us of our free time. Mm-hmm. I can't give to you, my brother, my sister, my non-binary, non-gender assignment, all of the words that are fit there for you. I can't give to you because I don't have time. I got to work these 2 and 3 jobs because these student loan people they want their money and they don't care about anything else that I have going on. And these jobs that I work, I got to work them. And then don't let me have kids and like a mortgage and a car note. Hey, bro, you do need to be fathered. You do need to be loved on. Yes. But I really can't because, bro, I got my own idea. And I don't even have children. I'm 33, no children, whatever. But that does not mean that I have time. Right. What that really means is that I just have no children in my house. But in terms of the requirements on my life, so being 33 and having student loan debt and being 33 and not having student loan debt are 2 very different lifestyles. Because when she get the knock with Sally Mae and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and Jim Jones and whoever else get to knocking on your door for their money, they do not care. And because there is no recourse for us in terms of the economic structure, so you can't, bankruptcy won't help you with student loan debt. It'll help you with everything else but that. That means that on your back until it's paid off is that. And if I have to work so many jobs to make it happen, I cannot be as actively engaged. And thus we have a fractured community because, bro, I gotta go to work.
Dr. Penny, so add on top of that, what you've been socialized to believe is a man. Right. So and that's why I was going with the definitions. Like, we need to broaden our understanding of words. Right. Because vulnerability is not necessarily a negative. It doesn't mean that you're weak, and it's not a feminine trait, right? But when that's what you believe, a lot of times, to Ashley's point, you meet these people that are at this place, and they're not even vulnerable enough to acknowledge the fact that they're at that place and allow you to help them and assist them in any way that you can. And a lot of times we're not even vulnerable enough to do it because that triggers us. That points out a weakness or a deficit in our lives or in who we are. And we as men, I say we're all here together, right? So if we had our village, our male villages, and we supported each other as men, similarly, but in the way that women do, because we do support each other as men, but it has a cutoff. Like you got here, and so that's it. Like I'm help you out to this point, and then it cuts off. I think this is one of those areas that we could take a page from our sisters, because our sisters will kind of go, broke for each other in their support, and not feel that it takes anything away from them. But I think that it's also our perception. So if I do too much for you as a man, I don't want it to be perceived negatively, like, oh, especially because in Black men, we have this whole thing about no homo and all of that stuff. I don't want any of those things attached to it. So I'm going to limit the things that I am going to do, right? And so that's an issue that we have to face, right? Because there are a lot of things that we could do as men for each other in support of each other that we don't do for various reasons.
Sure, absolutely.
Anyone else have anything on that particular topic? Because I know we need to wrap up due to time.
I just got one thing, and it's my last thing I'm gonna say, y'all.
Yeah.
When y'all were talking about time and having that time to give to someone and recognizing that and the vulnerability that men aren't allowed to show, I immediately thought, because I knew that was going to come up, I was like, we really don't have the patience for each other. People don't have the patience for each other anymore. But the thing is, when we need patience, we understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But when we have to give patience, it's different. And time is only a commodity when it's our time. But when we need somebody's time, that's different. So it's really a lesson on empathy, thinking about what you need. When I need it, I want it, and I need somebody to be there. But when somebody needs it from me, I don't have time. So it's all about making that time. And as far as for Black men, being raised in the capacity of you work, you take care of your family, you take care of your loved ones, that's all you do.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is we have to alter what take care of means. Take care of doesn't just mean provide financially and protect physically. That's not what that means. So change, like you said earlier, changing the definitions of how we look at these terms, taking care of, being vulnerable, patience, time, these things being a commodity. Looking at that from an empathetic standpoint will change a lot of how you view things. Think about it how you want it or how you didn't have it. Like, I didn't have this, but I know this young man needs this. So I'm going to give him what I didn't have, even if I feel like I don't have it to give. Because that's pretty much what women do. It's like, I ain't got time. I got 4 kids. I'm in school. I don't have time to give to this thing. But I would want somebody to give it to me. And I could care less about what they have on their plate because I need it. So that's what we do. It's like, okay, I'm going to put my stuff down. I'm going to give it to this person for right now, because at some point I'm going to need it back. So looking at it like that would be very helpful to young Black men.
Well, actually, so you made a mention of a thing that most Black men don't have, which is, if I give it, where do I get it from?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you can count, like Black women can count, hey, listen, if I can't go to this Black woman or that Black woman, chances are there's a Black woman that you can go to. The difficulty with Black men is, if I give my Black brother what I need, when I turn to my other Black brother, will they help?
Yes.
Right. And so the Black women are all that Black women have. Black men are being enticed and lied to believe that other people care about us. Right. Like we're lied to, like white women. Oh yeah, the tokenism is a beautiful, wonderful, destructive thing. And I think a lot of Black men have been so infatuated by Black male billionaires and Black male success that we think we too can get there the same route. But what we don't see is the insidious nature of tokenism. We praise Jay-Z, but we won't call him for what he did by selling Tidal. We will praise Sean Diddy Combs, but we won't call him for what he did at Bad Boy. We will praise Robert Johnson, but we won't call him for what he did when he sold out BET. So these are all things that as Black men, because okay, I can give it to my dude. I can give him this time, but where do I go when I'm hurting?
Exactly.
Where do I go when my pain is real and it's screaming at me? And I can go to my pastor, but I don't really know. And I go to my brother, I don't really know. And I'm kind of dealing with this. And don't let me be sick, Jesus. Don't let me have a chronic illness that I have to deal with as a Black man, because I already am an invalid in my mind because my physicality, my physiology is not as strong as it needs to be. And so now here I am trying to make sense of a thing and give time to somebody. And child, I'm tired.
Yeah.
These people getting on my nerves with this job. I hate everybody. Right. And that's a real thing.
Right.
Valerie, before we go, Dr. Nick, one more. Dr. Sutherland put his hand up. He wanted to say something.
Hey, great afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the time to speak for a moment. And we were touching on a few things, and I'll just share some of my thoughts about a few of those. One of the things that I learned a long time ago, that the path to manhood is a lifelong journey, and mastery is simply just staying the path. And a lot of times we get knocked off the course of the path that we should be on. And as far, because I'm hearing kind of rolls into fatherhood, and a lot of what my company is about strengthening the foundation of families and working with a lot of fathers as well. As a father and as a man, we know when we have children, the children are typically running up to us. They're running to us when they're little, elementary age, some middle school age. And as they progress older into adolescence, we actually have to run after them and chase after them. And we know that adolescence simply means adults with less sense. And we have some men who will, what we call extended adolescence. They'll be in that period of adolescence, and it's the mindset and behaviors for a long period of time. And also learned about what we call the three hoods. And I didn't create all this information. It's information all into the world. We have, when a man is put into this world, we have the malehood, which is just the anatomy of being a male, the penis. And we transition to the boyhood, and boyhood can last for a long period of time. I've worked with some men who appear to be in the boyhood mentality, and they're 65 years old and still in the boyhood mentality, meaning that they are consumers and that other people are still responsible for them. And then they begin to slowly transition, all of us begin to slowly transition into manhood, which is more about we're cultivating and we are producers and we're making the world and that we live in a much better place. And one of the scriptures I'm quite sure you guys are aware of, and definitely Reverend, I know you're aware of, where it speaks about when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned as a child. When I became a man, when I became a man, we put away. And a lot of things that we're dialoguing about is just the process of manhood is a journey. And some of us can still be struggling with boyhood behaviors where we've reached a period of manhood. However, we may be more manhood at work, or we may be more manhood in our community involvement. But sometimes in our home, we still have boyhood behaviors and we haven't quite yet made that full transition. And a great deal of what we do is provide mentorship for other men. I know Dr. Cunningham, we mentor other men who are in the field. Dr. Penny, glad to know you're a clinician. Not sure who else is a clinician on this call as well. But one of the things as part of what I wanted to do is years ago started mentoring other Black men who are in the field of counseling and psychology as well, to kind of reach back and pull them along. I don't know if you've seen a picture where it has, the men reaching down and they're pulling them up along. It's that senpai-kohai relationship, that mentor relationship. And a great deal of men, us Black men, we don't have another man that we can call upon to talk to. We have trustworthy men. We don't have those kind of men. And I heard someone speaking about what they do in other cultures when someone reaches the age of 16. My son is currently 18. On his 13th birthday, we had a manhood ceremony. It was a ring ceremony where a lot of men who were instrumental in my life, what I did, I had them come to this ceremony where they spoke words of encouragement into his life. They all presented him with a tie. They crowned him with a different colored tie. They spoke words. And I presented my son with a ring. It's a commitment of the covenant and bond between he and I. And then I did the same with my daughter on her 13th birthday. Had a whole bunch of women speak words and life into her as well. And they all presented her with a bracelet to understand, we use that phrase that it takes a village to raise a kid and have influence the community. I'm not really a believer in that unless I can directly influence the village. because I got to choose people who's going to offer something to my children to make sure when I pass on and die, no longer in this world, that those men and those women that I chose can influence them in a great way. And I heard Dr. Penny, you talked about how all the different men in your life, how they influenced you with their different expertise, knowledge, wisdom, and skills. And all of those people, they greatly helped you. That's kind of what I wanted to do, is to choose people for my son and my daughter to greatly impact their world. And then we gather together, and then they'll scatter into their schools, into their community to greatly influence, to make a better nation. We got to make our men more marriageable men. And I think, Miss Ashley, you were speaking about how men are protectors and what does it mean to take care of. Those are responsibility of men that we have been given and ordained. We're supposed to protect and provide and look out and take care of those responsibilities and be the priest of our household and influence our family. The nation will becomes better when families are more connected and get time at the table together and get to learn about the influence. The father is the head and he's supposed to direct those paths. And when the family is more connected, from my perspective, when the family is more connected, the greater your community, your city, your state, your nation, your world will be. And however, there are many systems and forces that have been placed before us that have been designed to fragment the family. Everything, from my perspective, is an attack on the family. When you separate the man, you attack the family. And I'm been a school counselor in Fulton County here in Georgia for a long time, elementary and middle school. And a lot of the forces are dividing the families. And the more you have single parent homes where it's just the mother and she's doing the best she can, and those men are separated, you have a fragmented nation. And we do the work to get the men to reconnect and connect to their children. The hearts of the fathers turn back to the children, the hearts of the children back to the fathers. We know the path to manhood is a lifelong journey, and mastery is simply the state of path.
All right, thank you so much for that. We'll turn it back over to Dr. Nick. I indeed enjoyed this conversation today. So hopefully we're able to do it again. Dr. Nick.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap up. Thank you all for participating. What I will say, so from our conversation, we can take some themes. One, toxic masculinity. It's not the masculinity that's toxic, it's behaviors. So there are some toxic behaviors. Let's stop calling it toxic masculinity. Let's call it the human experience. We can call it the human experience from a male perspective, but it's the human experience, right? And we all have our toxic traits, right? The other thing that we talked about is the fact that we do need to, as men, take on more roles and responsibilities in our communities. We need to show up. And we talked about the fact that when we do show up, it needs to be acknowledged the fact that we did show up. Like if we're going to highlight when we're not there, we need to highlight and acknowledge the fact that we are there. We talked about the fact that it's not just you have to be fathers, but we need uncles, we need fathers, we need cousins, because the village has different people in the village. And when you have the different people in the village, you never know who the child is going to relate to on what level. So, there could have been 5 clinicians that were talking to Dr. Penny, but 2 of them he took clinical from, and 2 of them he took just general life experience from, right? So you never know who. It's funny that you said, Dr. Sutherland, picking the people in the village, because in our conversation with Black mothers, that is exactly what we talked about, was making sure that you're selecting the folks that are in your village that are going to bring light and love into the child's life. So being selective into the people that we have. We talked about when we are mentoring in whatever role we are in the lives of younger Black brothers as they're growing up into becoming men, that we have to make sure that we're deliberate in the things that we're doing and saying, and that we honor that role and that responsibility. Like we've talked about that we talked about that ad nauseum. We also have acknowledged the fact that there's a system, and the system is in place, and the system is working. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. So what we have to do is we have to kind of go back to some of the things that we did as a community in the past in order to combat the system, right? And supporting each other. That we need to look at redefining words and how we're there and what that means to support and what that means to protect, what that means to provide. And that we also have to, in our communications, be again conscious and deliberate, and that when we're talking about behaviors, we label it as what it is. So if it's assertive, it's assertive, and stop trying to examine Black behavior through a white lens. So I think, like I said, thank you all. Next month's discussion is going to be on the LGB community. We're not going to talk about the trans community, because that's going to be a totally separate discussion group all to itself. And we've got another dynamic panel that's going to come in, and we're going to talk about that. Be looking at the NABC website, our Facebook page. We also have opportunities for folks to get their CEUs. And as I said from the beginning of this conversation, one, we don't bring no mess. Everybody that we had bought it, they will fire. And that's every month. And two, this is for us, by us. This is not supported by, created by anybody. This is BET before Bob Johnson sold it. So again, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.